Okay, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. We're joined once again by Dr. Jonathan Fuqua. It was, oh boy, maybe like 7 or 8 months ago. You were on the podcast and we discussed some of your holistic approach to the problem of evil. That was a great conversation. I really enjoyed that. I got a lot out of it. I know other people did as well. And you've recently had another paper published. This one grabbed my interest right away. As I confess to you, I'm not an epistemologist and I only sometimes pretend to be one on the podcast, but I do like to try and keep up with the literature and the discussion. And this paper of yours is combining proper functionalism and perfectionism. We'll discuss what those two things are to address a particular problem, which is like, hey, why should we care about this, whole truth and knowledge thing? Why are these things valuable, right? And that's a really interesting question that I think we'll get around to maybe trying to see how your account offers a solution to that. So welcome back. Thanks for being here, Jonathan.
Pat, thanks for having me. Enjoy the show. It's an honor to be one of your guests.
Yeah. Well, give us, it's been a couple months, so if you wouldn't mind, refresh our memory. Who is Dr. Fuqua? What are you working on? What are you doing? All that good stuff.
Yeah. So I'm a professor of philosophy at Conception Seminary College. For your first time viewers, maybe who missed the episode I was on earlier,
Yep.
Which is in Northwest Missouri. It's a Roman Catholic seminary run by Benedictines of Conception Abbey. We train students who are discerning priesthood in the Catholic Church, and they are required by the Church to major in philosophy. And so I'm one of the professors there. And my areas of specialty, I guess, I'm kind of a generalist. I teach across the entire curriculum. And our teaching, our institution is a teaching institution, not a research institution. So most of my time is spent teaching. But when I do have time for research, I do have some areas of specialty. Those are epistemology, ethics, and philosophy of religion / natural theology.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I do, and those are the areas I work in.
Now, I do want to remind the gentle listeners that you, I believe with Dr. McNabb, recently produced a volume on religious epistemology. Is that right?
Yeah, Tyler McNabb of St. Francis University, and then John Greco of Georgetown.
That's right. Yeah,
two of us co-edited the Cambridge Handbook of Religious Epistemology. It just came out a couple months ago, so it's a cutting edge handbook on all things in the field of religious epistemology.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, so let's dive into this, and even though this paper's focus on a specific problem, I think it'll be a good opportunity just to help the gentle listeners become familiar with different positions in epistemology, and even beyond that, when we start talking about perfectionism, specifically proper functionalism and what that is and all that good stuff. If you wouldn't mind, I would actually just like to read your abstract because I think it's a great summary of what we're going to be talking about, and then we can just sort of dive in. How's that sound?
Sounds great.
All right. So and by the way, do you know if this is open access? Can people get a hold of this?
Open access, but if anybody wants it, they can email me and I can give them a copy of it.
Great. Okay. Well, here's what this is about. Okay. So here's the brief introduction. There is a widespread intuition that knowledge is more valuable than any of its subparts, such as true belief or justified true belief. In the literature on epistemic value, the need to show that this is the case is known as the secondary value problem. In this paper, I propose to defend this intuition by solving the secondary value problem, a defense accomplished by an appeal to proper functionalism about knowledge and perfectionism about value. And I think that's probably good enough to pause right there. That gives us the summary. So what inspired you to write this paper in particular? Because like when I saw this, I was like, oh yeah, this is great. Like it, in fact, this seems obvious. right. And like, but was this like, I mean, we were talking before, like this just seems like if you're just a sort of traditional natural law guy who, was at least generally kind of friendly with Planaga, like this is exactly how you should approach this issue. And again, I'm like, I'm not totally hip to all the literature on this, but has nobody actually proposed this before?
I haven't seen it proposed anywhere, Pat. And of course, I should always make the caveat that I haven't read every single thing that's ever been written on this topic or any other topic for that matter. But yeah, I hadn't seen this published before. this paper actually originated in a master's thesis I wrote in 2009. I wrote my master's thesis in philosophy on the problem of epistemic value. And I think what got me interested in the value of knowledge is that I grew up in a Pentecostal tradition that was very anti-intellectual, and I sort of had this conversion to the life of the mind in college.
Yeah.
And I began to see and appreciate the value of ideas and the value of knowledge and the value of understanding. And then I was really interested in epistemology in general. And then as a student, I kind of stumbled on this literature where philosophers, epistemologists specifically, were talking about the value of knowledge. And so my interest in epistemology, plus my kind of my conversion to the intellectual life, really drew me to this topic of the epistemic value problem. Trying to explain why knowledge is so valuable. And I think I've always been attracted to proper functionalism, if for no other reason than because I'm a theist.
Sure.
And as a theist, I believe that that God has designed our cognitive faculties to operate in a certain way for a certain outcome. And so proper functionalism, which we'll talk about, fits very well with a theistic philosophical worldview in general, I think.
Yeah.
And then I think, one thing I mentioned in the paper is that epistemologists, they don't think very much or write very much about the nature of goodness in general. That tends to be discussed. Those discussions take place in ethics or maybe in metaphysics. And contemporary philosophy is very compartmentalized. People spend a lot of time working in this area and ignoring other areas.
That's right.
Maybe not on purpose, but just the way the field kind of works today. And so I think that the reason why this solution hasn't been put forward before is probably because a lot of the epistemologists who work on this topic aren't very familiar with the Thomistic theory of value, perfectionism. Or maybe they are aware of it, but it's not the most popular view of goodness nowadays.
To say the least, right? Yeah.
To say the least. Yeah.
Even goodness is kind of the whole term is falling out of fashion, right? Yeah.
And unfortunately, even proper functionalism is not a very popular view, even though it's kind of an obvious one, I think, if you're a theist. When I teach epistemology, I use I won't mention the textbook, but I use a contemporary epistemology textbook, which is very, very good. It doesn't even mention proper functionalism anywhere in the textbook.
Yeah.
Talk about every other theory of knowledge under the sun you can imagine, but not proper functionalism.
Oh, amazing.
And I think because I think a lot of people suspect.
Did phenomenal conservatism make the cut in there?
Oh, yeah, phenomenal conservatism made the cut, but not proper functionalism.
Funny.
And I think people rightly suspect that proper functionalism is somehow tied up with theism, and contemporary philosophy is very secular.
Yeah.
And so I think as long as philosophy is dominated by secularism, I think proper functionalism will probably never be a very widespread view in epistemology.
Yeah, that's interesting. I remember when in my first intro to ethics class, it covered pretty much every theory except for natural law, right? And it's like, look, even if you think there's like devastating objections here, like just out of sheer like historical curiosity, right? We might want to cover this one, right? But anyways, so that's all right. So that's really good stage setting. And what I like about this is like, hey, I guess I'm a kind of a common sense guy. I mean, that's what's great about the Aristotelian Thomistic tradition, right? It's all about, there's a lot of stuff that just seems common sense. Can we secure it? Can we illuminate it? And when we do that, things might get pretty complicated. But at the end of the day, we're still just, trying to be common sense philosophers, right? And there is this sort of just very common sense notion, and I think this is shared definitely among theists and non-theists. I think this is what is able to facilitate a lot of conversation when it's productive, is that like, hey, knowledge, truth, these seem like really valuable things, and we should pursue them because it's worth it for their own sake. I think that is definitely a very shared commitment. I encounter lots of people who have lots of different views on a lot of different things, but that one seems to be extremely common and extremely shared. So I think most people would definitely be on board with that as a starting point, and then trying to figure out some way to secure that intuition to make sense of that. You think that's right?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think most epistemologists who work on this problem have been trying to validate that very common sense idea that knowledge really is valuable.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about proper functionalism. This is obviously one of the core components to your proposed solution. So, square one, with proper functionalism. How do you like to introduce it? What's the history of this theory, and why do you think it should be taken seriously? Of course, you don't have to. It'd be unreasonable to ask you to defend it again. you know,
Yeah.
from every objection, but let's
Right.
make an initial case if you don't mind.
Yeah. So in contemporary epistemology, the theory goes back to Alvin Plantinga, his twin volumes on warrant, and published by Oxford University Press in 1993. Warrant: The Current Debate, and then Warrant and Proper Function.
Yep.
And then he followed that up with a third volume, Warranted Christian Belief, I think in 99 or 2000, also with Oxford University Press. And the basic idea is that knowledge is true belief arrived at by properly functioning cognitive faculties. That's the basic idea. Now, I think, in fact, that this idea, although not the label proper functionalism, I think the idea goes back a very long way. In fact, if you read the 2 chapters on Aquinas' epistemology in Eleanor Stump's 2003 book, Aquinas with Rutledge.
That's right. Yep.
She all but comes out and says that that Aquinas is a proper functionalist because he believes
and an externalist, right?
an externalist, right?
Yeah.
Because he believes in a design plan that comes ultimately from God, and he describes how human cognition is supposed to work according to that design plan. And when it does work accurately according to that design plan, you get good epistemic statuses out of that. You get knowledge, you get understanding, you get true belief, and so forth. And so I would say if Stump's reading of Aquinas is right, that proper functionalism goes back at least to St. Thomas. And of course, St. Thomas is taking a lot of his P's and Q's from Aristotle. And so I would argue, although I'm not a specialist on Aristotle's epistemology, I would argue that the theory probably goes back at least to Aristotle.
Yeah. She was quite. I remember she made that in fact that provocative claim that like this might be reason to think even Aristotle is an externalist, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So if you think if you believe in God and you think that our cognitive faculties do have a design plan, as I said, then I think that you've got pretty good prima facie reasons for thinking that proper functionalism might be the way to go. Now, as to how to motivate it on purely philosophical grounds, I think the way Plantinga does it is he runs through all the other options and shows you how they fail.
Sorry. Yeah, these aren't so good, right?
Proper functionalism can explain all the cases, and by which I mean all the thought experiments about when people do know and when they don't know. And so, Pat, it's kind of unfortunate, I think, but so often in philosophy, it seems like we're reduced to this position, to this sort of strategy, I should say. Look, I believe that P. Now, why should I believe that P? Why should you believe that P? Well, because Q, R, and S, the only other alternative options, are so terrible that P is the only plausible, decent option left standing.
Yeah, right.
And so no matter what you might think about P, since it's clearly superior to these terrible rivals, you should believe that P.
Right on. Right.
So I think in motivating proper functionalism, you have to look at the alternatives, try to describe what are the problems with those, show how proper functionalism is not subject to those same problems and therefore is the best option.
Comes out the winner, right? And yeah, Plantinga engages that project quite extensively through those volumes. Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you. I've been very attracted to this view since I first began studying it, and I've also been like curious, how does this square with Thomism as a whole? And the truth is, when it comes to Thomistic epistemology, most Thomists are really more interested in like the broader metaphysics of knowledge, right? And I would like to see more people doing work to show that I think what seems to me an obvious compatibility here between these camps, right? So like you read somebody like Yves Simon, like he's really interested in the metaphysics of knowledge, but doesn't have much to say about Gettier cases and stuff like that, you know?
Right.
Okay, cool. All right. So should we just maybe get perfectionism on the table real quick, and then we could, or how do you think is best way to proceed for?
We can get perfectionism on the table and then maybe rewind and kind of go through the epistemic
Connect the dots. Sure.
Yeah. So perfectionism is just the view that the goodness of a thing is determined by its function or its purpose. So one way into this is to start with I think pedagogically, Pat, one way into this is to start with the privation theory of evil. So the privation theory of evil says that badness or evil just consists in the absence of some being that's supposed to be there. So there's a difference between an absence and or a privation and a negation, right? So stones can't see, but that's not bad because stones aren't supposed to see.
Right.
But if a human being can't see, that is bad because human beings are by nature the kind of beings that are supposed to have visual perception.
Right.
So blindness is the absence of some being, some mode of actuality which is supposed to be there in human beings due to their nature, right?
Yeah.
They're directed toward a certain mode of actuality. And so if evil is the absence of being that's supposed to be there, then goodness is the presence of being that's supposed to be there,
Right.
such that a thing is good insofar as it is actual. And out of this, you get this Thomistic idea of the convertibility of being and goodness.
Mm-hmm.
That if a thing is good is insofar as it is actual, then anything that is pure actuality or pure being will also be pure goodness itself.
Right. Mm-hmm.
This is why we say that God is both pure being itself and also pure goodness itself.
Yes, that wherever being is, goodness is also just being considered under the aspect of perfection or desirability.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly. So applied to things, you and neither you nor I nor any other created thing is goodness itself. Rather, we have participated goodness. We have a specific nature. That nature, like all things, that nature directs us to certain modes of actuality as the ends or function or goods that we are directed to by nature. And so a thing is good. A thing is a good instance of its kind to the extent that it realizes the modes of actuality to which is directed by nature.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That's the basic idea.
Yeah. And that's an important restriction because it's not just like more being, more goodness in general, right? Otherwise, they're going to have some weird outcomes like I should just go try and get as fat as possible. And I'm not trying to do that, obviously. And I don't think that that's wrong. But when you realize it's really about actualizing the species specifying potency, right? For us, which relates to our rationality, that being really gluttonous is actually an irrational act, right? That's actually making me worse off. So there's a lot of nuances account that can, I think,
there's a lot of modes of
obvious
actualities that are not good for us because our natures don't direct us to those things.
Yeah, right on, right, yeah.
The proverbial 10-year-old boy that wants to jump out of his grandfather's barn, right, and breaks his ankle is trying to actualize a mode of being to which human beings are not directed by nature, flight.
Right. yeah, it's another good example.
And the good thing about this perfectionist theory of value, I think, is that like the proper functionalist view of knowledge, it's very old, right? This is not a new innovative theory. It's one that's deeply embedded in the tradition, goes back at least to Aristotle, I would say, if not further. So I think that the historical pedigree of perfectionism and the historical pedigree of proper functionalism give those a kind of epistemic weight, such that we really need to take these things seriously when we're doing epistemology.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think that it has resources to overcome a host of issues that other accounts simply do not, right? Now, I think it has some good positive reasons for it too, right? It's not just like, well, this is the best of the worst. No, I think it's better than that. But yeah, right on. Good. Okay, so I'm willing to bet that people could probably already like start to connect some of the dots, but let's rewind the tape and maybe just sort of, reiterate what the problem is and then how you think that these accounts of proper functionalism and perfectionism help to provide a satisfying resolution.
Yeah. Okay. So epistemologists are really focused on knowledge. Now, there are other epistemic statuses that also that get discussed, such as true belief, justification, even understanding. Some people think that there's a debate whether understanding is different from knowledge or whether it's just a type of knowledge. But there seems to be at least a distinction between understanding how my computer operates and simply knowing that it operates, right? But knowledge has been the focus, and we should maybe back up just a little bit more and talk about a certain type of knowledge that epistemologists focus on, which is what's called propositional knowledge.
Right.
Knowledge that such and such is the case. Knowing that Lincoln is the 16th president, for example. Now, there are other types of knowledge which epistemologists acknowledge and sometimes discuss, such as acquaintance knowledge and how-to knowledge. So how-to knowledge, such as how to play the piano, how to ride a bike, how to walk. And then acquaintance knowledge is being directly acquainted with something experientially.
Yeah.
So, for example, colorblind scientists might know all there is to know about the color red from a third-person perspective, but has never experienced redness. he's never been acquainted with redness. So there's a type of knowledge he won't have unless his color blindness is cured somehow.
Yeah.
Okay, so when I say that epistemologists are focused on knowledge, what I mean is propositional knowledge. And the standard story there is that propositional knowledge requires at least justified true belief. And then the question is, we seem to prefer knowledge over merely having a true belief, right? If I asked you, would you rather know that P or simply merely truly believe that P, you would pick knowledge. As you said, it's sort of a common sense idea that knowledge is really good, but why is it more valuable than any of its parts?
Right.
That's what's known as the epistemic value problem, explaining why knowledge is more valuable than having a justified belief or just a true belief. Now, this problem, it's complicated by a couple of factors. One is the Gettier problem. And so I'm going to assume that maybe some of your listeners don't know about this, although many perhaps do. So maybe I could just quickly explain this, if that's okay, Pat.
Yeah, you know what? That'd be great. Give me a little sound bite, and I'll make a little short clip out of it. That'd be great. So, I don't think I have like an intro video on the Gettier problems yet.
Okay, so the Gettier problem is that there seem to be cases of justified true belief which fall short of knowledge. Okay, so take a standard case. Suppose that at 8 p.m. The night before, your analog clock, the batteries die, and your clock is stuck at 8 p.m. You don't know this. And the next morning at 8 a.m., you happen to look at your analog clock, and it happens to be 8 a.m., and your clock is stuck on 8 a.m., so you form a justified true belief that it's 8 o'clock. It doesn't seem that you know this, however, because the explanation for why you arrived at a true belief is not due to cognitive ability or proper function or reliable belief-producing process. The most salient explanation, the most important factor that is, in answering the question, why do you have a true belief, seems to be luck.
You just got lucky, right?
You just got lucky. So if it had been 7:59 a.m. and you looked at the clock, you would have formed a false belief. If it had been 8:01 a.m. and you looked at the clock, you also would have formed a false belief. So it's pure happenstance that you just happen to look at the clock at the right time and form a true belief. So but your belief is justified, right? Because looking at a clock is normally a very reliable way to form a true belief about the time. And you have no reason to think that your clock is malfunctioning. Maybe you just put brand new batteries in it like 3 days ago or something like that. Okay, so even if you can show that justified true belief is valuable, more valuable than having just a true belief, justified true belief isn't knowledge. Knowledge has 4 conditions: belief, truth, justification, and some 4th condition, variously called a Gettier condition or the anti-luck condition. And so you've got to explain now why satisfying that condition is also valuable. Okay, so the other factor that complicates this is that some people have an intuition, Pat, that the only epistemic standing that really has fundamental value is truth. And this is sometimes called veritism, from the Latin veritas, for truth, right? That truth alone is valuable. So why do you care about having a justified belief? It's because justification is supposed to be truth conducive. That's what makes justification valuable. And so if veritism is true, then having a justified true belief would seem to be no more valuable than having a true belief. Because the only reason that the value of justification is parasitic on the value of the truth.
Truth, right, yeah.
So once you've got the truth, you have no extra value from having a justified true belief, if that makes sense.
It does, yeah.
And so now if truth is the only value, if veritism is correct, then the same problem is going to befall you when you satisfy the Gettier condition. Because satisfying the Gettier condition will also seem to be valuable just because it helps you get to the truth in a more reliable way, or something like that. And so this is, in the literature, this is called trying to show that, this is called the swamping problem. The idea is that truth swamps all the other parts of knowledge.
Yes, right.
Meaning that knowledge is not more valuable than true belief, which undermines our common sense idea of knowledge as having this distinctive kind of special value that justifies our pursuit of knowledge.
Yeah, right on.
So that's the problem that I'm trying to solve.
Great. Yeah, well articulated, well said. How do we solve it?
Okay, good. So
Don't keep us in suspense. Yeah.
okay, so yeah, I think the best way to solve it is by combining the two ideas we talked about earlier: proper
Right.
functionalism and perfectionism.
Mm-hmm.
So I lay out in this paper there are different versions of proper functionalism out there.
Oh yes. Mm-hmm.
Plantinga is not the only proponent of this theory. Famously, Plantinga seems to think that justification is not actually a requirement of knowledge. He
Mm-hmm.
says that knowledge is warranted true belief, and he gives a proper functionalist account of warrant.
Mm-hmm.
But his student, Michael Bergman, who was my dissertation supervisor.
Oh, I did not know that Bergman
Yeah,
was your supervisor.
yeah,
Interesting.
excellent supervisor.
Yeah.
Anyone out there who might want to do a PhD in philosophy, if you're interested in epistemology and philosophy of religion, Purdue is a good place to, or medieval philosophy for that matter. Purdue is a good place to do those things.
Yeah, for sure.
So Bergman argues that justification is necessary on knowledge, contra Plantinga, and he argues for a proper functionalist account of justification as opposed to warrant.
Okay.
And his account of proper function is it overlaps to a large degree with Plantinga's, but there's some small details where their accounts diverge.
Yeah.
So what I try to do is in this paper is to lay out a kind of what I call a very broad and ecumenical understanding of proper functionalism. So
now just remind me, Bergman was Plantinga's student as well, right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah.
To take a step back for just a second, Pat, and to piggyback on something you mentioned earlier about how Thomists are traditionally interested more in the metaphysics of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's true, and I think there's something afoot though. I think in the recent last 20 years or so, Thomists have begun to connect the dots between Thomistic theories of cognition and contemporary epistemology. You see that in Stump's writings. You see that in John Jenkins's book Knowledge and Faith and Aquinas.
Yep.
You see that in the work of contemporary epistemologists like Gregory Stacy, who's more of a theologian but does religious epistemology.
Right.
Tyler McNabb of St. Francis University and other people. But I think my view is that the way forward for proper functionalists is that if we can get the Thomists on board with proper functionalism, to get them interested in epistemology, and they can start doing epistemology too from a Thomistic perspective, that might be the best way to develop the proper functionalist tradition of epistemology.
I'll not only agree with that, I'll go one step further. Get the hardcore classical theist involved. So that way you can start to wrestle seriously with the meta epistemology, which to my mind has not been adequately dealt with most proper functionalists. But I think classical theism would offer some very unique resources in that area. And to my mind, there's like nothing out there on that.
Right.
But that's a conversation for another time.
Yeah. Okay. So I follow Plantinga. I say knowledge is warranted true belief. I follow Bergman in thinking that justification is a condition on warrant, though. And so, but my broad and ecumenical account is something I mentioned earlier, that knowledge should be defined as warranted true belief, and warrant requires proper function. Now, more specifically, proper function itself requires two things, at least. It requires that a belief be subjectively appropriate and objectively fit. And those are terms that come from John Greco. A lot of early work he did in the early 2000s. So I use that terminology of a beliefs being objectively fit and subjectively appropriate. I also use my own terminology, meant to be synonymous with those phrases of a belief is so to say that a belief is objectively fit is to say that it's objectively well formed, and to say that a belief is subjectively appropriate is to say that it's subjectively well formed. Now, these things can come apart. Let me give you an example.
Yeah.
Suppose that you believe some proposition P on the basis of a logically fallacious argument, but that through no fault of your own, you think this argument is actually valid. Your belief would be subjectively appropriate.
That's right. Yeah.
From within your own epistemic situation, by your own lights, given the factors, the evidence, the grounds you have to go on, You should believe that P. That's the rational thing to do. But it's not objectively well formed, because basing beliefs on logically fallacious arguments is not a good way of
Not
forming
great.
belief.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And they can come apart in the other direction, right?
Sure.
You can have an objectively well formed belief that is subjectively not appropriate. Okay, so if knowledge is warranted true belief, and if warrant requires proper function, or another way to put it is that your beliefs be properly formed, and if proper belief formation requires objective fitness and subjective appropriateness, then to show that knowledge is more valuable than just any lesser epistemic standing, what you need to do is show that subjective appropriateness is something we value for its own sake, and that objective fitness is something we value for its own sake.
Yes. Yeah.
That
I
makes
love
sense?
this aspect of your article, by the way. This is great. Yeah.
Okay, so I begin by doing what philosophers call intuition pumping, which is I began with some thought experiments designed to produce the desired intuition.
Mhm.
And so imagine two people in the paper. I just call them A and B. We'll call them Alvin and Bill.
That's good.
Okay, so Alvin and Bill both have objectively fit true belief. Alvin, though, has also a subjectively appropriate true belief, and Bill has a subjectively inappropriate true belief. Would you rather be Alvin, or would you rather be Bill?
Yeah, my intuition is pumped. It's like it hit the gym.
Good.
Mhm.
So yeah, so that seems to show that we do value, even after we've already got objectively fit true belief,
Mhm.
we still value subjective appropriateness. In other words,
Right.
we still value having our beliefs formed in a
Yeah.
subjectively
It
well
just
formed way.
really
Right.
seems like that's better, right?
It
Yeah.
just seems that that's better. Exactly. Now we haven't explained this seeming. We haven't explained why this
Yeah.
seeming is veridical.
We're just reporting it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We're just reporting it. So we can imagine two other agents in the paper. I call them C and D.
Mhm.
We can call them Clint and Derek. Let's say that both Clint and Derek each have subjectively appropriate true belief. Clint also has an objectively well-formed belief, and Derek lacks an objectively well-formed belief. Would you rather be Clint or Derek?
Yeah, intuition pumped right again. Just
Right.
seems like right. And
Exactly.
I'd
You
rather
care
have it
about
well formed in both respects. Yeah.
right
Mhm.
in both respects. Right. So now there's to support this intuition pumping. I also give an analogical argument from ethics. So for an action to count as fully virtuous, it needs to be objectively the right action, but it also needs to be done for the right reason. So it needs to
Mhm.
be objectively justified and subjectively justified. All right, if you perform the right action for the wrong reason, there's something defective, morally defective, normatively defective about your action.
Mhm.
But if you perform the wrong action for the right reason, there's also something normatively defective about your action, right? It wasn't objectively well formed, wasn't
Yeah.
objectively correct.
Right. Right.
So for a fully virtuous action, for an action to be fully virtuous, that is, we seem to require something analogous to objective fit and subjective appropriateness.
Totally. Right. Right thing for the right reason. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. So
And that's just classic Aristotle for sure.
right.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Mhm. So I love that. I love drawing that link, and that actually prompted me to, and maybe we could talk about this more at the end. Of again, like what's the relation here between what you're proposing and a virtue epistemology? Uh, we'll bracket that and maybe come back to that at the end. But
Sure.
for now, yeah, continue. Mhm.
Okay. So now the question is, okay, I've got the seemings you want me to have. my intuition.
Thanks for pumping the. I need like an intuition pump prop, whenever we do that on the podcast, whatever that looks like. Yeah.
But why should I think that these intuitions are veridical? Maybe it does seem to me, I'll confess, that I seem to find myself valuing both objective fitness and subjective appropriateness. But why do those things have value? Which is the
Mhm.
same thing as asking, why does a properly formed, i.e., warranted true belief have value? And so to answer this question, we bring in the perfectionist theory of value.
Yes, right.
So our cognitive faculties are aimed at the truth, but they're also supposed to function in a particular way. They have a design plan. And the goal of our cognitive faculties is not just truth any old way we can get it. It's truth formed by faculties that are functioning according to the design plan in the environment for which they were designed.
Hmm.
So if the good of a thing is defined by that thing fulfilling its function, that is by living according to its design plan, by doing what it's supposed to do,
Hmm.
then the cognitive good for human beings will be arriving at the intended end in the way specified by the design plan. But on the proper functionalist theory of knowledge, that's just what knowledge is. It's arriving at the intended end, truth, in the way specified by the design plan.
Yeah, really nice fittingness there, right? Hmm.
Right. So that's in a nutshell. That's the account.
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, like when I first read this, I was just like, it's not like, and that's not to downplay the paper. I think it's an extremely well done paper, but to me, it was just like, duh, right? Right. If you're at all a classically minded theist, like this is absolutely the way that you should handle this. I think you've articulated it extremely well. Perhaps I don't know. Maybe we should cover an objection or two, either to the account as a whole, or just to proper functionalism or perfectionism. Did any pop in your mind, or any that you had in the paper that we didn't cover so far?
Well, I think objections could be raised by rival accounts of the nature of goodness,
Yep.
and then to there's because there are different theories of goodness. G. E. Moore famously held that goodness is an indefinable, primitive,
Right.
unanalyzable property. Um, uh, there's the hedonistic view of the good as pleasure.
Hmm.
So I think in a holistic case for this solution, you have to defend the perfectionist theory of goodness against rival accounts of
Yeah,
goodness.
you have to do like a wider paradigm comparisons and
Right,
evaluations
and of
for
course
sure. Yeah.
there are critiques of the perfectionist theory of goodness itself. You might deny that there's such a thing as teleology in the first
Hmm.
place. Um, you might hold that maybe teleology exists only if God exists, but God does not exist. Therefore, there's no such thing as teleology, and that would destroy the proper functionalist account of knowledge.
Hmm.
Um, you might try to hold that there are examples of goodness that don't fit the proper functionalist paradigm. That you might say that there are cases of things achieving their function where what they do is actually maybe bad or something like that. Um, so yeah, I think that and that all that sort of goes beyond the scope of this particular paper.
Hmm.
This particular paper just sort of assumes the perfectionist theory of value. Or another way to look at it is, so one way to plump for your view is to say, look at these problems that it solves.
That's right. It's saying, hey, we're comparing theories and views. Here's a particular problem, and it seems like my paradigm has the resources to
Right.
seriously assist with this, so that
Exactly.
it scores some points on that front. Well, yeah,
Right.
right.
And epistemologists have argued that your theory of knowledge should also explain the value of knowledge.
Yeah, yeah, for
In
sure,
theory,
right?
what knowledge
That would be
is,
nice.
understand why it's valuable. And
Mhm.
to the extent that there's no agreement on that in a literature pattern, there really isn't. There's
Yeah.
no
Oh, yeah.
consensus about why knowledge is valuable.
Mhm.
To the extent that this theory can accomplish that task, that is a check mark in its favor.
Yeah. Yeah, I certainly agree. That's why I was excited to talk about this paper. I think it brings a lot of those very important points right to the surface. So thanks again for producing it. Congrats again on
Yeah.
it
Thanks.
getting published. What do you before we go? What are you working on next? Do you have any new projects that you're able to tease at this point? And make sure you
Um,
mention some of the older ones too.
sure. So I'm working on a paper right now called Thomistic Epistemology versus Moral Skepticism. That's going to be coming out in an edited volume called Thomism Revisited.
Oh, is
The
that the one that, is Kerr
Yeah,
putting?
Gavin
Yeah,
Turtle,
great. Oh, very cool. Yeah,
um,
I'm looking forward to that one. Yeah, Gavin told me
yeah.
that he was working on that.
And here
Mhm.
I'm gonna take resources from Thomistic moral epistemology, kind of a Thomistic common sensism, and show how
Mhm.
those can be used to address contemporary moral skeptical arguments.
Oh, that. We'll have to definitely have you back on
Yeah, we'll have to
that one. That'll
talk
be
about
cool.
that. I've also got a couple papers that are that I'm working on in regards to recent work on common sense epistemology,
Yeah.
which should come out in Phil Compass at some point,
Right.
and an entry in the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy on common sense philosophy. And yeah, I don't have any. I'm not really working on any of. I've edited 4 books, but I'm currently not really working on. I've got some other book projects that are in the brainstorming stage. Um, Listeners of this podcast would probably be most interested in the Rutledge book that I co-edited with Rob Coons that came out earlier this year. Classical Theism: New Essays on the Metaphysics of God.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, really nice volume.
And then I've edited a couple volumes on converts to Catholicism, one about theologian converts, and one on philosopher converts.
Oh yeah, that was the one where remind me of the name of that. Wasn't it just like Faith and Reason or something like
Yeah,
that?
the one on philosopher converts is called Faith and Reason. Philosophers explain their turn to Catholicism.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember really, really enjoying that one because I read it a
Thank
while
you.
ago, and yeah,
Yeah,
I didn't know
Rob,
you. I didn't know you at the time, or even and that
yeah.
now that I'm just remembering that you were the editor.
Some well-known philosophers that classical theists would no doubt know and love are in that volume. Rob Coons, Ed Fazer, Jay Bujashevsky,
Yep, yep.
uh, Peter Kraft is in there, his conversion story. And then the one on theologian converts is called By Strange Ways, and that just came out 2022, I think.
Oh, cool. I missed that one. I'll have to check
So
that one out. Very cool. Excellent. Well, a lot of great work. Really appreciate it. Appreciate you being here, Dr. Fuqua. Is there a best place for people to keep up with you online? Are you on the Twitter or anything, or just at your academia page, or what?
yeah, probably my academia.edu page is where I keep things most updated. I don't have a fancy personal website. My wife keeps saying she's going to make one for me, but she hasn't done that yet. So
Gotta
I
love
don't
it.
have the
Gotta love
skills
it.
to do it myself. So at some point, I hope to have a nice personal website. But yeah, academia.edu is the best place to keep up with me. I
Wonderful.
usually post my work on there. Pat, did you want to circle back to the question that you raised earlier about virtue epistemology and proper?
Yes, I did. Thank you for reminding me about that. Yes, if you wouldn't mind, just to expand upon your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So um, as I said before,
And,
you and
maybe we should just give a brief overview of like what virtue epistemology
okay,
is as
good.
well. Right? Yeah.
Yeah. So virtue epistemology is another main school, another camp, school of thought within epistemology about knowledge. And it says that knowledge is a result. It's true belief arrived at by arrived at through intellectual virtue.
Mhm.
And there's different theories about what type of intellectual virtue is necessary for producing knowledge. But yeah,
Mhm.
it's true belief arrived at through intellectual virtue. And some of the big proponents of that theory have been actually some Catholic philosophers, John Greco and Linda Zagzebski.
Yeah. Also, a friend of mine, Stephen Napier over at Villanova. He's
Oh,
producing a fair amount of work.
he's a virtue epistemology
He
guy.
is right. Yeah.
Um, and sort of the godfather of all these theories in contemporary epistemology, at least, is Ernest Sosa.
Hmm.
Now, what's the relationship between virtue epistemology and proper functionalism? So there's at least 3 different views about how they relate. So one is that they're rival schools of thought.
Hmm.
Um, Now, why would people think this? Well, in contemporary ethics, virtue ethics is nowadays thought to be a very distinct moral theory from natural law theory. So if you find a contemporary ethics textbook that gives an overview of normative ethical theories, you might find one chapter on virtue ethics and another chapter on natural law theory.
That's right. Yep.
But in the past, so given that dichotomy in ethics, I think a lot of so epistemology is a normative discipline like ethics, right?
Hmm.
And people are inclined to think that virtue theory is not the same thing as a proper functionalist theory. And I actually think in both cases, that's a mistake. If you look back in the history of moral philosophy, for the most part, virtue talk was always situated in a broader metaphysical framework of natural law.
Yes. Right. Mm-hmm.
But that's one view. Virtue epistemology is a rival. It's over here. Proper functionalism is over here. They're both externalist theories, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So they're on the same side against the internalists, but they're different theories.
Right.
Now, some virtue epistemologists argue that proper functionalism is actually a type of virtue theory,
mm-hmm.
and some proper functionalists argue that virtue epistemology is a type of proper functionalism.
Yeah, right. Uh-huh.
So either one of those second two views would be better, I think, than holding them to be rival views.
Mm-hmm.
I think I would take the view, maybe this is something that, this probably could be another article at some point in the future, Pat, for myself or anybody else who wants to investigate this issue.
Mm-hmm.
My inclinations are to say that virtue theory is a type of proper functionalism.
It's a species of proper functionalism, right?
Yeah, because at least given the metaphysics that I have and the philosophy of human nature that I hold to, a virtue is a habit of acting is a habit of using a power to achieve the end that the power is aimed at in the way that the power specifies. So the thought is that we have these powers is a powers ontology, to use
mm-hmm.
the language of metaphysics.
Yeah, contemporary metaphysicians.
These
right?
powers are aimed at certain modes of actuality. But not only that these powers have a design plan. So they are supposed to be used in a certain way. So the end that they are aimed at is supposed to be achieved in a particular way according to the design plan of the power. And so a virtue is a habit of using your powers well, that is, successfully attaining the end toward which they are directed in the way specified by their design plan.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's what a virtue is, then virtue properly understood leads into the idea that virtue epistemology should be thought of as a species of proper functionalism.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Well, that sounds right to me, but I will leave that to all the researchers in the comment section to give the final word on, and hopefully you will write a paper on that at some point. That'd be a lot of fun to read. So appreciate the bonus there at the end. That was just sort of something that came up before we hit the record button. So I was glad we were able to circle back around to it. But Dr. Fuqua, it's been a blast. Really appreciate you coming back on the podcast, and would love to have you back on anytime.
Thanks, Pat. It's been a pleasure.